Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you've just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theorycraft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Today we are doing a set of quick builds. We'll be looking at two briefly summarized character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. And as always with our quick builds, if there are ever any builds that you'd like to see me explore in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments below. The concept for our pair of quick builds today comes from Christian W. 1975, who asked for both a Drizzt build as well as an Artemis Entreri build from the Forgotten Realms books by R.A. Salvatore. We're going to do both these character builds in one video because mechanically there isn't a whole lot to them. Playing Drizzt or Artemis at an actual D&D table in a D&D campaign is going to really come down more to theme for their character rather than anything mechanic, since the books that they're from are generally more about who they are as characters rather than what they can do. With that said though, there are certainly things that are integral to their characters that we can always try to pick up, as well as a few mechanics that we can try to get in order to synergize both thematically and mechanically with the characters. So whether you would want to play one of these two characters as Drizzt or Artemis in a D&D campaign, or you want to have a character that's at least similar in concept to what they would sort of be like in the D&D 5e setting, or if you're just interested in seeing my take on how these characters would be built in D&D, then come along for the journey as we explore the build. Starting off our build now with Drizzt. With Drizzt, we are going to look first at the lineage, the stats we would probably want to have, and then the background, and then we'll talk about the actual full build, though we're not going to do a level-by-level breakdown. For Drizzt, our lineage is picked out straight away for us. We are a drow, which means we're an elf, subrace drow, and that's just all there is to it. There's nothing else that we're really trying to scheme here. For our stats, we will probably end up using the optional rules from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything to reassign our ability scores as we choose, since we don't really need the extra charisma that drow typically get. So with that in mind, and using point buy, we're going to want the following array of ability scores. 10 strength, putting 2 points into it to get there. 16 dexterity, putting 7 points into dex, and then adding our +2 from being an elf into there. We're going to have 15 constitution by putting 7 points into it and then putting a +1 to get us to a total of 15. We're going to take 10 intelligence, just putting 2 points into it. We're going to put 7 points into wisdom to get us 14 wisdom. And then we're going to finish off with charisma, putting 2 points into it to get us a total of 10. You can feel free to reassign the ability scores as you choose, and honestly feel free to put the +1 that we reassigned from charisma into any stat that you want. I left it in constitution to be a little bit more generalist, but if you had something in mind that's specific to Drizzt, you could put it there instead. For our background, we are going to pick noble. Despite the fact that Drizzt is a sort of lone wanderer figure, his actual origin is from a noble house in Menzoberranzan. Even if the society there is matriarchal and he is a male drow, he's still of noble heritage and noble blood. We're going to use noble for our background and just call it a day. And now for Drizzt's actual build. Well, for pretty much the entire build, we are just going with fighter. Even though Drizzt is often thought of as the archetypal ranger, a lone wanderer with 2 scimitars who has an animal companion traveling beside him, he actually isn't a ranger. His beast companion, Guinevere, isn't an actual animal that he has befriended. It is an obsidian statuette that he took from another character. It's effectively a figurine of wondrous power, which is a magic item in D&D. That means that even though, yes, he has a nigh unbreakable bond with Guinevere, they don't share that bond because of a ranger ability. It's because of the magic item. I'll say right now, though, that if you do really want Guinevere as an animal companion, then you probably will multi-class ranger eventually in the build, since there isn't an actual obsidian panther wondrous figure according to D&D 5e rules. So short from asking your DM to have one given to you at some point throughout your campaign, the only other real way to get Guinevere as an actual companion is to go Beastmaster Ranger or pick up the Summon Beast spell at some point. As a fighter primarily though, since we were not only born into a noble house, but we were also trained by Zach Nafane, the house's weapon master, We were trained to be a weapon master ourselves, and no class fits that better than the fighter. As a fighter primarily, we're going to want to pick battle master as our subclass, since that also makes sense with the various techniques that we would have learned from Zaknafein, and we can use our maneuvers in tandem with two-weapon fighting. Getting that bonus action offhand attack is just an extra chance to use another one of our battle master maneuvers. And of course, Drizzt is best with the dual weapon fighting style, so we'll take two-weapon fighting as our first fighting style right off the bat. But now that we know that Drizzt is, in fact, a fighter, at least primarily, and then with the possibility of mixing Ranger to pick up Guinevere eventually, what sort of things are we picking for our feats? Well, right away at level 4, we're taking the Drow High Magic feat. This feat doesn't synergize mechanically with our build at all, but it is necessary because Drizzt is a high drow and even learns his innate magic in the books. So because of that, we want to pick up the Drow High Magic feat eventually. I'm saying we're just getting it out of the way right away with our first ability score improvement / feat. Next at level 6, we'll take the Dual Wielder feat, but really all we're getting from it is the +1 AC, unless your DM is a stickler about being able to draw 2 weapons at once. If they are, then this would probably have been better to actually pick up at level 4 and swap it with Drow High Magic. But now that we have it, it's fine. We're still using dexterity-based weapons because we're also just using scimitars, not like longswords or warhammers or anything like that for our dual wielding, but it's still a welcome feat to have. If you don't want it, feel free to pick up just a +2 increase to one of your stats instead. For our next feat, at level 8, we're going to take Elven Accuracy, because it is mechanically pretty powerful, but also because it's very thematic that Drizzt, being an elf, would have access to some unerring accuracy, from time to time at least. Elven Accuracy is a half feat, so we can increase our Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma by 1. I'm going to say we're putting our Dexterity up by 1, but you can increase any other ability score by 1 if you wanted. And then whenever we have advantage on any attack roll that uses Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma from now on, we can reroll one of the 2 d20s once. That's effectively the same thing as just rolling 3d20. At level 12, we can then round off both our Dexterity and Constitution, putting Dexterity to 18 and Constitution to 16. And then for our next 3 feats at levels 14, 16, and 19, we'll just increase our stats by +2 for each of those levels. We can put our Dexterity to 20. We could increase some mental stats if you want to do that. You could also put your Constitution all the way up to 20 if you'd rather just focus on being more martially oriented. And we really have a lot of options. If you did multi-class into Ranger, one thing I would recommend doing is probably a 12-8 split, so we have 3 attacks from Fighter, but then we can also get 2 ability score improvements from being Ranger. And, assuming that we pick Beastmaster as our Ranger subclass to get Guinevere, would probably be a Beast of the Land, and the Beast of the Land stat block scales with our Ranger level, so we want to have at least a relatively good Ranger level. Going 12-8 as a split will end up losing us 1 ability score improvement total, but that's not the end of the world since we're really spoiled for choice with how many we have. So now that Drizzt is done, it's time to talk about Artemis, his arch nemesis. Well, first of all, Artemis is a human, and as a human, we're going to pick human variant, since Artemis isn't your typical human for the most part. With human variant, we'll get an extra skill. You can just pick your favorite for that, or whatever feels appropriate for Artemis, if you know more about them. We can also improve 2 ability scores by +1, and we gain a free feat. For the free feat, we're going to take Alert. Artemis is very aware and tactically oriented, and Alert captures that pretty perfectly, plus we'll mechanically synergize with what we're picking up later on. For Artemis's stats, we're going to want the following array of ability scores, but again, you can feel free to reorganize them however you see fit. We're going to want 10 strength, putting 2 points into it to get there. We're going to put 9 points into dexterity, as well as one of our +1s in order to get 16 dexterity, same as Drizzt. We're going to want 14 constitution, putting 7 points into it. And then we're going to want to put 3 points into intelligence and our other +1 to round it off to 12. We're then going to take 4 points and put that into wisdom to get 12 wisdom as well. And we're going to put our last 2 points into charisma, giving us 10 charisma. Now for our background, we're going to pick urchin because Artemis is an urchin. He grew up on the streets and he learned how to be stealthy, underhanded, and fight dirty from his childhood in the city. looking at Artemis's build now, he's pretty similar to Drizzt, and that makes sense because not only are the characters each other's nemeses, but they're also meant to be literary foils of one another. Artemis is Drizzt if life had turned out differently, and if Drizzt took a bit of a darker path. Because of that, we're going to be pretty similar overall in terms of our class, in that we are staying as a fighter, at least primarily. We are for sure going to multi-class into Rogue though. Artemis is a legitimate assassin, which means that we can go up into Rogue to pick up the assassin subclass and gain the assassinate abilities along with a few other things. For the split that I would suggest, I would recommend Fighter 16 and Rogue 4 for Artemis, but if you wanted to be a bit more roguish, then you could obviously change that to go further into Rogue if you wanted. 16 Fighter will get us 3 attacks as well as our choice of subclass. We're picking Battlemaster as well, since Artemis is a very tactically oriented combatant. And it again can synergize pretty well with 2-weapon fighting, which is the main fighting style we're picking. We also definitely want to get the Ambusher maneuver as a Battlemaster, because the Ambusher maneuver allows us to add 1 maneuver die to either a stealth check that we make or an initiative roll that we make. That really synergizes well with the Assassin subclass to help us either get into position for a really powerful surprise round, or get the drop on our enemies in the initiative order in order to have automatic advantage from the assassinate ability. For the feats that we're going to get, at level 4 we're going to pick up Dual Wielder right away. Again, it's optional since the only real benefit we're getting to this is the +1 to AC, or potentially being able to draw 2 weapons at once if your DM is a little bit more stingy with that type of ruling. Then at level 6, we're going to take Slasher to be able to gain a +1 to our dexterity, as well as have an extra little effect on both a critical hit as well as return when we deal slashing damage. And then at level 8, we're actually going to go and get Piercer. That way it doesn't really matter which finesse weapon we're using, or even if we want to use a ranged weapon, we're going to also be able to gain an extra once per turn effect and a bonus effect on a critical hit. Plus, since they're both half feats, they'll round off our dexterity to 18 nice and easy. At level 12, we're going to improve our stats, or potentially take Sentinel. Sentinel can be flavored as more of a dirty fighting tactic for us, because it allows us to sneak attack off our turn should an enemy provoke an opportunity attack from us. So that can be a pretty good option. And at level 16, we can either again improve our stats, or instead take a feat like Keen Mind. Keen Mind isn't the most powerful, but it could be pretty thematically accurate since Artemis is supposed to be quite the brilliant thinker. Finally, our last feat, which could actually come a lot earlier depending on when you pick up Rogue 4, which is either another improvement to our stats if you really just want to be well statted out, or we could pick up Martial Adept. Martial Adept gives us 2 extra Battlemaster maneuvers and 1 extra Battlemaster maneuver die, so we can be even more tactical in combat. Other than that, that's both of the builds, so it's time to summarize each one. Well, thematically I think we pretty much captured each one of them, maybe not to the full extent that we could capture them, but keep in mind that a lot of the flavor for each of these characters is going to come from both how you would roleplay them, as well as what happens in our adventures and the various items that we could get. Thinking of Drizzt in particular, Guinevere is a magic item that then changes the story and his adventures and who he is as a character. And that's something that's very classic about D&D. Characters weren't always about the class abilities that they got, but rather the adventures that they had and the items that they got from those adventures. It was about that experience that really informed who they were and what they would do in the game. Sure, there are some mechanics that we could get to try and mimic the various adventures that they have went on and the things that they have gotten from those adventures, but realistically, nothing's going to mimic it better than just doing the adventures ourselves. Looking at them mechanically though, with Drizzt, if we did pick up Guinevere from multi-classing into Ranger though, would be pretty bonus action heavy since we want to use 2-weapon fighting, but then also control Guinevere, which maybe something like the Summon Beast spell would be a bit better since it doesn't require our bonus action to command that beast, which can be okay from time to time and very utility oriented. We have Elven Accuracy, so whenever we gain advantage on our attacks, we're going to be really likely to hit, and possibly even crit. And so because we have so many ability score improvements / feats, our stats can just be really, really good. We can max out dexterity for sure. We can get some other stats really high, or possibly even max out something like constitution as well. The choice is totally up to you. For Artemis, the playstyle is a little bit more informed, since we know we wanted to be an assassin, and assassin has a pretty laid out playstyle. It's meant to just maximize the assassinate ability, which we're doing by having the alert feat, getting us a +5 to our initiative. Our dexterity, if we max that out, is then an extra +5. And we can spend a maneuver die to add a D10 if we went high enough in fighter. So we're definitely probably going to go first and be able to get that automatic advantage on all of our attacks for that first round of combat. If we used it for a stealth roll instead, hopefully we'd actually get a surprise round, meaning that we could then really dish out a lot of damage with some automatic critical hits, which we could then dump even more Battlemaster maneuver dice into. Overall, the two characters are really two sides of the same coin. Both of them are expert duelists and master combatants, and I think it's fair that the builds really reflect that. But they have their own unique tricks up their sleeves based on the lives that they have lived. Other than that, let me know what you thought of the two builds, or what you would add or change to get closer to either Drizzt or Artemis, or even both. There's probably a few things that I may have overlooked or would be a bit better for each of the characters, since I'm not really an expert on the Forgotten Realms books, but it was at least interesting to learn about the two characters and think of how they might function in D&D 5e. Thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.